me. I am Coach Dunham, again with Coach Hamilton. Today's episode will be brought to you by the A.C.E Car Wash located in Richmond, Kentucky. Family-owned, small business, big supporter of sports in our community. We thank them for helping us out here. Take your car through their car wash, manual, automatic, whatever you like. Today we have an interesting conversation. We are meeting up with JP Nerbun as well as Nate Sanderson, and they have a little business called Thrive on Challenge. They are coaching mentors, giving their insights of coaching. They're more basketball oriented in their background, but their focus is coaching philosophy, how to deal with difficult situations, difficult parents, difficult players on your team. And they've got some great insight and a lot of history that I think a lot of coaches could benefit from.
Yeah, this conversation is really, really special to me. I met JP and Nate through their own podcast that they run called the Coaching Culture Podcast. Highly recommend you check that out. They have helped me quite a bit in my coaching career. Again, these are the two guys where ACE came from. So this is a really cool conversation for me to be a part of with these two gentlemen. I appreciate them coming on. We focused our conversation with them on creating leadership within the athlete. So more of a player-led program. How do you get players to start to develop some leadership themselves, intrinsically, so it's not always having to come from the coach?
Yeah, absolutely. And all ages, really. We didn't just focus on the high school level. We get conversations about middle school and introducing leadership in the elementary ages. We know that they're still developing their minds at that age, but great concepts here, great information. This conversation went a little longer than we had expected, but the information here is quite valid, and frankly, we think it's beneficial for everybody to take a listen to. So again, JP Nerbun, Nate Sanderson, Thrive on Challenge. Hope you enjoy. Let's get started.
Joined by Coach Nate Sanderson and Coach JP Nerbun. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate the opportunity, guys.
So real quickly before we get started, I've spoken with both JP and Nate on many different occasions. They have been kind and generous enough to pass their wisdom on to me. A couple different coaching scenarios and situations that I have had play out in my career. So this is a really cool podcast for me. These are two gentlemen that I look up to, that I view as role models. So I'm very lucky to have them on. And as a matter of fact, JP and Nate, you guys don't know this yet, but I'm getting ready to tell you. The ACE Football Academy, the name actually stems from one of your all's podcast episodes that you did on your show, The Coaching Culture. It is, I cannot remember. I've tried to go back and find it, but I think it was a guest who mentioned that they used ACE and that attitude, commitment, and effort. And so it is something that just stuck with me. It is something that I use every day on the field with my players. My players even use it now. So we actually about 3 or 4 months ago completely kind of revamped our podcast. We changed our name to the ACE Football Academy. So I guess I owe you a lot of credit for that name. So thanks, guys.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think it's important that we reach out to multiple coaches to get different perspectives. And I think in today's society, we're too focused on our social media bids rather than having face-to-face conversations like this. So I'm excited to have these conversations here. So first off, get some introductions here. JP, if you want to start off, give us your background, what you're into these days, and some things that you're interested in today's coaching culture.
Yeah, guys. I was a high school basketball coach for 5 years before I started the TOC. Before I was a high school basketball coach in Tennessee, I was in Ireland, kind of coaching youth and professional levels there. So I had over 10 years, and then I kind of went out and started a coaches business, and we started a podcast, Coaching Culture Podcast. And a year into that journey, I brought Nate on as kind of my co-host, and now the two of us have been working together just to try to provide leadership coaching and culture consulting for sports coaches, which is through my own experience desperately needed as I went through some challenging times within my own leadership and my culture. And it was not a book, not a podcast. It was actually working with someone one-on-one that was probably most impactful for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's cool that you get a chance to go to Ireland and coach. Can you tell us quickly how that opportunity came up? Was it just like a freak run in, right place, right time kind of situation, or?
Yeah, it's such a long story. The short story is I played Division I basketball at the University of South Carolina as a walk-on, and devastated when I didn't make it in my second year on the team. I kind of decided to run away to Ireland and fell in love with the place and decided to finish out my degree there. And one day walked into a gym and just said, "Hey, do anybody need a basketball coach?" And all of a sudden I had like 6 job offers in the next week. So
Yeah, it's funny how opportunity knocks when you least expect it sometimes. So that's awesome. Nate, you're next. Give us a quick introduction, a little background on yourself as well.
Yeah, guys, it's great to be here. My name's Nate Sanderson. I've been a high school girls basketball coach, head coach for 21 seasons now in Eastern Iowa, and I'm on my fourth rebuild, going into my third year at my current school at Mount Vernon High School. As JP mentioned, we've been working together here for about, I think it's 4 years or so now on the podcast, and just providing support individually for coaches, and I've been really fortunate to learn a lot along the way from JP and some of the great coaches that we've been able to work with in all sports. So excited to be here today.
Excellent, guys. We appreciate you guys being here. Trey, want to start us off here? We've got a few questions for you guys to review. We'll get to some debates and discussions here, but feel free to speak up anything. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so again, those of you listening, it is the Coaching Culture podcast. It's on Apple. It's on all your podcast platforms. I highly, highly recommend it for those of you that have not discovered that podcast yet. Guys, we're going to kind of focus on leadership today and building that leadership, especially in young athletes. And so the first question we kind of want to talk about is, what does leadership look like at the youth level? So we're talking, 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, because that leadership is going to look very differently than it might be with your senior captain in high school on your varsity team. So just kind of what does leadership look like at the youth level?
Nate, you want to start this off?
Sure. I think, I think you're right. Obviously, what you can expect from a team leader at the varsity level or the collegiate level is going to be vastly different than a younger player that's first learning the sport, learning how to be coached, learning how to be a teammate. I think for me, that leadership philosophy kind of roots just in you're trying to build kids to have a positive influence on others, whether it is just the simple things of showing up on time and helping to pick up after practice and picking up their teammates when they make mistakes and trying to help create a positive environment. It isn't necessarily done through captains or through any kind of formal process, but really just the encouragement of being a good teammate and trying to create a place that, they want to be with their friends playing this sport, I think is really kind of what starts them in that leadership process.
Yeah, I think that's cool to mention that. Really, you're focusing on the sportsmanship side of being that leader, working with your teammates, encouraging them, whether it be practices or games. JP, do you have something to add on that?
Yeah, I think Nate just hit it out of the park there. I think so much of youth athletics, in my experience, as I've started to coach my own kids, has been so focused on the individual and just making sure that they're having a great experience. And I think that's great to see that out there today. This focus on, how can we get them to, fall in love with the sport and enjoy their time at practice. I think sometimes we become too hyper focused on that at the expense of, hey, what can you do to make this a great experience for other people? And when everybody's doing that, it's going to obviously lead to a better experience. I think the only thing I would add to what Nate shared there is just really trying to focus in on the relationships early on, and trying to, even at young ages, can you have conversations with your athletes that have nothing to do with your sport? And so with my daughter's team, it's 7-year-olds, I'm trying to awkwardly stumble my way through, conversations with, 6 and 7 year old kids around their interests and what their day was like. And it's, I'm as awkward as could be, but I'm giving it my best, and you can see though their faces light up and they appreciate that connection. And I think I've been fortunate to be inspired by a lot of great coaches that at the youth level that I've gotten to work with, and I'm following their example.
Yeah, I like to press on that a little bit more, the fact that you're having these one-on-ones. So for any of the other coaches that are dealing with youth level, whether it be U8, 10, or U12, how often should we be having these conversations? And what specifically are we talking about when discussing leadership at that youth level?
Yeah, I think when it comes to those conversations at that younger ages, I mean, it really depends on how much you guys are practicing, how much you guys are around, how many players are on your team. So I think there's a lot of variables into that. Um, I can't say to prescribe a specific number of how many conversations you should be having. I think it comes down to, at the end of the day, though, you're trying to engage at every opportunity you can, right? And so the more you can create opportunities outside of the practice itself, like, we had a, cookout with the team and just had the parents over and stuff like that. So the more I can get to know their parents and build relationships there, the better. And I think the conversations when you're sitting down having like leadership conversations as they get older, back to Nate's point, you're just trying to talk about and getting them, I think, a lot of times to ask questions rather than giving them lectures. And when you ask questions, you really want to ask questions that are more open-ended questions that are going to get them to think about what can they do to have an impact on their teammates. What can we do as players? What can we do as, what suggestions do you have for us as coaches that can make, this a better experience? Or, what thoughts did you have on the game there? What could we have done better as a team? What could you have done maybe to support your teammates? So really trying to engage with open-ended questions to get them to maybe have some awareness and make some suggestions around what they can do, the coaches can do, the team can do to improve that experience.
I love that. And Nate, you kind of hit on this. I love that whole thought process because it's actually something that I hadn't thought about before. Leadership at these youth levels that we're talking about, it may not be, hey, come on, guys, we got to play better. Hey, come on, guys, we're doing great. It may be the player who stays and picks up the cones after practice, or the player who gets there early and is, hey, coach, do you need help setting up? I think at the youth level, that type of thing is actually easier for players than being that on field or even off field support for their teammates.
And if I could just add,
guys, moving in. So let's talk. So we kind of, sure.
Oh, sorry, Charlie. I was just going to add a little bit to what JP said there. When it comes to the one-on-one conversations, I think so often I coached my daughter's 9U basketball team this past year. We didn't do any formal one-on-one conversations or anything like that, but it's just the casual. They walk in the gym, they give you a fist bump. How's your day? And I think, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to figure out from them is just how things are going, and just trying to have a pulse on, are they having fun? Are they enjoying the sport? Do they have any questions? And I think the other thing that you can do with those younger kids, and we certainly do this with our older players as well, but Joe Ehrmann talks about in his book, Inside Out Coaching, how his athletic life and really how he saw himself was changed when a coach said, here's what I see in you. And we don't necessarily need to, give this grand prophecy over what kind of player this kid is going to be or something like that. But when I see, JP as a teammate go over to one of his, friends on the team that just struggled in a drill and trying to pick him up during the break or something, I could celebrate that in front of everybody. But I could also make a point by the end of that practice just to put my arm around JP and say, man, I saw you go over there, and give your friend some comfort or some encouragement, man. That's what it means to be a great leader on this team. I really appreciate that. And so looking for those little opportunities to affirm some of the things that they may already be doing and celebrating those tends to, make it more likely that they're going to repeat those kind of behaviors.
Yeah, I think the concept of one-on-ones is very interesting. It's something that I did at the high school level when I did coach the high school girls. And I think those one-on-ones, no matter what age they are, I think players really appreciate that because it makes them feel valued. It makes them feel that, hey, coach does care. And so I love the aspect of those one-on-ones. We could do a whole conversation about what those look like, but we'll stick with leadership today. I want to talk real quickly. So we've identified the youth, and what that may look like. So now as we start to develop into the middle school years, freshmen, those types of years, how does leadership change? I think it becomes a little more on field. You see it, and I want to dive deeper into this question, but just on the basis, how does leadership starts to change as our athletes get older?
Well, I think one thing that as athletes start to gain more experience, they have more knowledge that they can share. And I think about what a gym looks like when we have 7th and 8th graders together. We have freshmen that are coming into a workout in the summertime for the first time with high school players. It isn't necessarily rah-rah speeches and a lot of vocal leadership and maybe that traditional sense sometimes that we think about. It's a lot of just providing help, just providing tips and getting them organized into drills and encouraging them when they make mistakes and, showing them, walking them through the offense. Like this year we had, we probably had 5 or 6 8th and 9th graders come to our high school camp and they're learning our offense for the first time. And our upperclassmen who are defending them, but as they're walking with them, they're talking to them in terms of this is where you're going, this is what you're looking for. Now we're going over here. And again, it's just done interpersonally, but I think as much as they gain experience, being able to encourage them to share some of that with those that are following them can be really effective in terms of them starting to develop a voice and be comfortable more with that as they're growing.
Yeah, I love that. I love the just kind of almost talking the younger kids through a practice or through a drill, like, hey, this is what we do. This is how we do it. I think that's really, really valuable. And then let's take it a step further. And JP, I know, and Nate, and Dunham as well, we've all coached at the high school level at some point in our coaching careers. So when we get into that high school level, is it more of the same, more of the coaching through drills and coaching through practice, or does it become more vocal and more on field and like, coach, we don't need you anymore because we can handle it?
Yeah, I think what you're really trying to go there is you're trying to create that more of that player-led culture. But I honestly say that, trying to make this some sort of chronological thing that happens with their development through age is not necessarily always idealistic. I've coached pro teams where players are really quiet, reserved, and it's a very coach-led environment because that's what they've been used to. So I think wherever level you are, I think, when you're trying to take something from a coach-led team to a player-led team, it's about identifying where they are in their leadership development stage, their ability to communicate, to support each other, to hold each other accountable, and so I think that's a, I would say a big component of it. I think the other thing too is as you get to the older levels, though, is what you definitely want to see in the higher levels is more responsibilities given to the leaders on the team. And I think that's probably the biggest determining factor for me would just be their level of responsibility increases. So, that could be when it comes to responsibility, being a part of the decision-making process, from simple things like what time are we going to leave tomorrow? What time do we need to get up? What time's curfew today? Down to, other decisions that might actually even be difficult that you might be struggling with when it comes to whether you bring a player up from the freshman team to the varsity. I know Nate's got some great stories around that. I think also responsibility comes down to being clear what those responsibilities are. And I'm a big fan of a leadership council method. I talk about it extensively in my most recent book, The Culture System, but really at the core there is, hey, we've got these leaders that have been elected. We're allowing and empowering the players, the team, to be responsible for electing this group. And then now we're giving these players the responsibility that are the elected leaders to look after, to support, to serve, and to connect with a unit. So we try to go with more of a decentralized command. So, hey, this leader, you're in charge of these 3 to 4 players. So when those players are struggling, maybe it's with being on time, maybe they're struggling in school, maybe they're struggling with attitude, maybe they're struggling to buy into their role, rather than you as the coach having to be the only one that's supporting those individuals within the team that are struggling, you can go to that captain, that leader of that unit, and say, hey, what can you do to support this individual? Hey, they're struggling here. So how can you help them? And so I think you really start to give them more responsibility as they get older and more mature.
I'm going to jump down a couple questions because you just mentioned the Captain's Council. You've mentioned that several times throughout your on your all's podcast. You mentioned it a few times in Calling Up, your book Calling Up. Sounds like you go into even further depth in your second book. But so I'm at the U12 level right now, and I actually, at our end of the year party, I had a couple of those one-on-ones just real quickly. We're hanging out by the pool, and, they come over and want to, goof off or something. So I just take, that 30 seconds real quickly to have those one-on-ones, even if it's just a quick one question. Hey, what do you think about this question? And so one of the questions I asked my girls so captains, the way we do it, I pick captains based on that ACE, based on that attitude, commitment, effort leading up to the game. It might be it comes from the practices, that week prior to the game, and then it comes to the warm-ups before the game. Who is really, we have a quote on our team, who is truly living their ACE. And so when that whistle blows before a game and it's, hey, send us some captains, I just pick 2 or 3 girls who've been living that ACE this week, and they go and they're captains. So my captains change every week, normally. And one of the questions I asked my girls as we move into that middle school age type soccer was, what do you think about naming captains or electing captains for the entire season? Having 2 or 3 players who are just going to be our, labeled captains. When do you think that should start to become a thing? My girls were very hesitant. My girls did not like that idea. I think some of it stemmed from the thought that, hey, we're not going to be chosen, and we like being the captain. So when does that kind of start happening? And when, JP, you mentioned it, when do you start really implementing that captain's council?
Yeah, I'll say a few things here, and then I'm sure Nate can, give a lot of insight in here too. I mean, Nate has been so influential in my perspective on this, because I think he does an amazing job. But I think at the U12 level, those are parts where I love the system that you have at that age group of just kind of rotating around and giving other people and honoring the effort and attitude. As you start to hit adolescence, you start to see that the reality is, it's pre-adolescence, but it's really big time in adolescence and high school age group that you're going to see there's going to be influencers, and they may not always be the ace. They might not always be 100% on attitude, commitment, and effort, but they are going to dictate where your culture goes, more so potentially than even your attitude, your commitment, and your effort as a coach. And so I'm a firm believer that I want to have those people in the leadership role because I want to develop them. I want to work with them. I want to mentor them. And I want to make sure that we're on the same page. It's kind of one of the things I think was really reaffirming for me recently when I was reading Joe Madden's book about, the book of Joe. And he talks about how one of the things he always tries to do is identify the lead bulls. And the lead bulls comes down to this idea around, the Native American used to hunt buffalo, and they would find the lead bull, and they would drive that lead bull towards the cliff, and they'd run the whole tribe off, right? So it's just, who are the lead bulls that I can identify and work with them? And so this is key. And I think, so having the players elected, I'm not a big fan of just like, hey, everybody just vote for who you think should be captain. I think you need to sit down and say, what is the purpose of this leadership council? What do we need in our captains? What are some great qualities, and what would those things look like? And then you have them come in and say, okay, based upon these qualities, these are who I think are the top 4 people here and here and here. And then, we've got a kind of elaborate system there because we're trying to make it less of a popularity contest. But still, at the end of the day, I just want the people that are going to have the real pulse in the team and be able to influence. And I'm going to really work with those people. And that's typically how team culture and dynamics work as you start to go into adolescence and beyond. It's like, the LA Lakers could pick who they think is the ace there, but the reality is LeBron James sets the tone for that team, right? So it doesn't really matter what you think a great leader is. LeBron is the leader, so you better have a good relationship with LeBron.
And I
Nate,
think
anything to add on that?
the only thing I would add too is that the structure maybe doesn't matter as much as the content and the purpose. So you could continue even at that age level to do a rotating captains or picking captains based on their commitment to your values and still be able to identify who those influencers are, and in your conversations with them be able to offer some mentorship and some guidance, and to encourage them to use the influence that they have on the team to make us better and to encourage your teammates and to help us to work harder and that sort of thing, without necessarily having a formalized structure or recognition that this is a captain or this is an influencer and therefore they get this, that, or the other. I think when I look at our experience working with captains or with upperclassmen at the high school level, I know that's a little bit older, but my conversations are different, widely different with every kid based on what their role is as a teammate, and some of them are on the captain's council and some of them aren't. And we're still trying to, mentor them and guide them into being better influencers on the team. So I think JP is exactly right. You try to figure out who the players that are going to have impact on the team and on those values, positively or negatively, and make sure that you're pouring into them in some way. But I think you can sort of have a hybrid model too, where you're rotating that to an extent, and still in your one-on-one conversations, you're molding leadership of each individual on your team.
Yeah, I want to focus on, the kids being the mentors of other teammates here. How do we focus on the kids who are continuously not reaching expectations? You speak to your captain saying, hey, Hamilton's having struggles over the last 3 weeks of completing a certain drill. And the captain speaks to him for the next 2 weeks, and the guy still just isn't getting it. He's still not having that correct attitude and practices. How do we go about helping that individual that's struggling to meet the team's expectations, even after the coach's conversations, the captain's conversations, and he's just not getting to that point? How do we focus on improving that situation?
Well, I feel like this is a little bit of JP's wheelhouse here in terms of just opportunities for accountability here. So maybe I'll let you set the stage here, JP, and I can clean up anything after you're done.
All right. Yeah. I've spent, I guess, a good bit of time working on discipline strategies and studying them. And I think, if I'm getting your question right, it's like, what do you do when, just to clarify, the captain's not meeting standards, or the captain's not struggling to help another player meet standards?
Yeah, so the player on the team is struggling to meet standards, and the captain is trying to help, as well as the coach. And with both of them trying to help, that teammate still isn't reaching expectations.
Yeah, that's great. And so what I love about what you shared there is that, hey, before you hold people accountable, you got to have support, right? So those things go hand in hand, right? So you're challenging, right, but you're also supporting. You're supporting. You're holding people accountable. And at the end of the day, we want our athletes to feel like we're an advocate for them. We are interested in what their goals are, what's important to them, and that we're just there to support those things. Before you can talk about what the accountability will actually, how to enforce those consequences, you got to make sure that you have some sort of agreement. And so if you come agreement what the standard is, and there's clarity there, right? So there's many ways to do that. But you got to have clarity of what your standards are. And I really think you got to co-create those standards. Some things can come from you. I'm always a big fan of like some coach non-negotiables. But really when it comes down to is really sitting down with the team and saying, hey, what's really important to us? What are our goals? What do we want the experience to be like? Okay, what do we need to do to create that experience for us and achieve those things this year? You collaboratively work with it. But in that process of creating standards, which I know is it's starting to get a little bit more really done widely. I think there's one thing that people leave out all the time is like, okay, what do we do when we don't meet the standards? What does the accountability look like? How do you want us to hold you accountable as coaches, right? So having that conversation is really, really important, because you need to have agreement, not just the standards, but agreement to the consequence. And then that's also clear. So when you do that, I'm a big fan of logical consequences and restorative justice, right? So restorative consequences more for off the field type stuff, which is, it's not about penalties and punishment. It's about kind of like, if there's been two players get into a fight, it's about restoring and repairing the rupture in that relationship. Logical consequences rather than penalties and punishment. And there's some great books out there in parenting that you could follow and pick up that go into that, one being Positive Discipline by Dr. Jane Nelson. My book goes extensively into it as well, just what that looks like in sports. But here we're trying to treat basketball or soccer, whatever sport we are, it's a privilege. And practice is an opportunity to get better. So within the practice, within the games, right, if you're not meeting standards, you're going to lose that, right? So we're going to come in, we're going to support you. But if you can't get your effort, you can't raise it, you're going to lose the opportunity to get better in that drill. And we're going to pull you out of that drill and you can join us in the next drill. Like, it's making them do it over again sometimes. If they're late, they might miss a practice or they miss a part of practice. And that's so counter-cultural or counter to what we're used to doing. I think we're really used to coming in like, we're going to make them pay. We're going to throw a penalty. We're going to make them run. And it's like, no. Let's take a step back from here. Like, why am I doing those things? Right. I'm doing those things because it's like trying to control them. It's fear-based. It's eventually I might get compliance, but it's going to be because more out of fear. And I want them to do the hard things. I want them to be a good teammate, have a good attitude, be committed, and give great effort because they know that's going to lead to their success, because that's who they want to be as a teammate, because, it's who they want to be as a person. Right. So that's kind of like a brief overview of the approach. And I think, those can be done on an individual basis as well as a team basis too. If your team's not working hard, rather than running them, just pull them all in and say, hey, is this the standard we want? No, it's not. Okay, well, you got so much time before you pick it up, or else we're just going to go home for the day, right? That type of approach. But I'm sure Nate's got some other stuff he can add as well too.
Yeah, I think JP is exactly right. One of the things that I've stolen from him that I really have used a lot is just that idea of the progressive consequences. Sometimes we look at someone with a quote unquote attitude problem, and our first, response is to put them on the line or to kick them out of practice or to bench them for a game. And sometimes, they just need a moment to reset. There are times where a kid comes in and they're dysregulated, their emotions are a little bit of a mess and their mind is elsewhere. And I remember a situation last year, we had one of our starting post player came in and just had a rough day, and she was tired and she had a rough day at school with some tests and stuff like that. And she just she said, can I just take a walk with Coach Moss? And that was the intervention that they had talked about. This had happened before, about a month earlier. And they came to this agreement that, look, if you need a minute, I'll just go walk with you. We'll get it off your chest and then we can come to practice. So they literally just walked out of the gym together down the hallway a couple of times and came back, and she was fine for the rest of practice. Right. And that maybe sounds like, well, I don't have coaches I can just run off with individual players, but it's not something that happens often. But my reaction to that 10 years ago would have been to put everybody on the line. We're either going to work hard today and have a good attitude, or we're not. You guys got to be accountable for each other, give that speech, and then become the tyrant, until we get what I think practice should look like. And we've just found that the more, as JP said, we give players space, but with support, and we make the choice clear to them. And I think that's the other thing, taking from like Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. So he talks about just a very matter-of-fact tone of voice. If JP's having a problem today and we've talked about it and he's not giving an effort, as JP said, like, we just pull him out of the drill and very matter-of-factly, this is what's expected in the drill. And if you can't do it, you're going to need to sit here until we get to the next one. You can try the next one. And that's it. Can you do it or not? And if not, you need to sit this one out, and it doesn't have to be with anger. It doesn't have to be with rage. It doesn't have to be with yelling. But I think the more clear you can make the expectation in the moment, give them the choice, and then just move on, without holding a grudge against them in the next drill, which sometimes can be hard for coaches as well. The other thing that we're trying to do in all of this, right, is the ultimate goal is that we want players to be able to self-regulate. Eventually I'd like our post player to be able to come in after having a bad day and be able to figure it out on her own without necessarily having to take a walk with Coach Moss. But kids don't know how to do that, and some of that's modeling as coaches, and some of that is just giving them guidance in the moment of, here's a way to check yourself, get yourself back in the drill. This is how you get in, and just be very calm. You're trying to help them learn those skills and give them the opportunity to do that.
I love that. It's so... Two real quick things to touch on before we move on. I love that whole process of, the progressive consequences and things like that, because even at 12 years old with my team, when I ask, I ask them all the time, sometimes individuals, sometimes as a group, hey, when we have those moments when our ace is slipping, when our ace is low, We all know it. We all see it. How do we fix it? And I cannot tell you the number of girls that will look at me and say, well, you just need to run us more. You just need to put us on the line and run us. And to me, I can tell coaching in the past, that's what they've been used to do. Hey, we're not meeting expectations, so coach needs to put us on the line and run us. And so, we've had those conversations, just like you all said. Look, we play soccer. Running isn't a punishment. Running is a part of the game. So, and we have those discussions, but I think it's so hard with just the way sports and society are today to get to break those bad habits, whether it's from previous coaching, whether it's from previous cultures or whatever it is. But I think it's really difficult to start to break that mold in those players. So the second thing I wanted to bring up, and this goes back to JP, what you were saying a little bit earlier, but you mentioned, is it they're not working effort or they're showing up late to practice? How do we handle, and again, this is a whole nother topic, but just real quick answers. At my level, at Coach Dunham's level, a player being late to practice or a player, whatever it is, most of the time isn't the player's fault because they're 12 years old. So it's mom and dad's fault. It's little sister's fault who couldn't find the shoe, or, all those types of things. How do you go about handling, a parent who is consistently late to practice, which means their player is always 15 or 20 minutes late to practice? And clearly it's not the player's fault because they're 12 years old. They can't drive themselves to practice. So how do you go about handling that situation?
Well, I'm always that parent, so I can speak from that side of the table. But my daughter, her second grade year at school, we get the report at the end of the year was she was late to school 31 days out of the year. And I certainly shared in some of that responsibility. So anyway, I think when it comes to a parent, oftentimes if you really just have a conversation with the parent, and this is, we're late because we have a 5-year-old and I'm not very organized in my life. Okay, so I take responsibility for that. But a lot of times, parents are struggling because they're getting off work and they're trying to pick up their, the younger sister, and then they got to run to the park to get somebody to softball practice. Just trying to be proactive. Is there anything that we can do to help get Susie to practice? And there are times where I've leaned on other parents to, drop my kid off early or have them get a ride with somebody else. And I think sometimes parents are they're afraid to ask for help, and so that can go a long way, just offering some support on that side of like, hey, we've got 2 kids that come from the same neighborhood. I'm sure they'd be happy to, give a ride or whatever. And that might be enough, A, to start a conversation, and B, the parent might really appreciate just knowing that they can reach out to somebody for some help in situations like that. And can I add one thing to that too, that I learned just this past weekend? So Adelaide, my 9-year-old, was playing in a softball tournament on Saturday, and the softball coaches want him there 30 minutes early for 9-year-olds to be able to get ready for the game, whatever. So part of me in the back of my mind is just like, this is ridiculous that we have to be here this early. But anyway, so we're running late and trying to get everybody in the car and get Adelaide down there. And for the first time in her life, Adelaide's 9 years old, been late to school last year 31 times. It was stressful for her that we were late because of me and her sister. And I thought that was progress. And I hadn't really seen it through her eyes before, but she's like, I don't always like to be the last one that walks into practice. And, then I've got to play catch with the other person that's late who never can catch the ball. But she was upset about it. And I thought, okay, now she's starting to understand punctuality a little bit here. Maybe I need to step my game up a little bit because it does affect her. So at any rate, that was a first in our family.
Yeah, I think Nate's got a great point there.
I
just would add that I think, creating an environment where the athlete really wants to be there, and I think it's at some point, obviously, you might have to bring in some sort of consequences, and the parent has to figure that out at the older levels, and that varies. I mean, I've worked with coaches at very, very high levels, but they're still like in New York City, and they got players coming an hour and a half, and you just like, every situation is unique and I think that's what Nate suggested of just meeting the parent where they're at. But are you as a coach creating an environment where they want to be there early? There's good things happening. They feel like they're getting better, And I think that's the end of the day. And obviously there's some sort of pressure now on Nate's daughter that's causing her to give dad some pressure there so he can get his life together.
Yeah, that's good stuff. So, getting back on the leadership conversation here, we're trying to build these kids up at young age groups. So when they're into high school or into college, they've developed these skill sets or characteristics in their personalities. Are there certain core values, I guess, that you want to start to have in developing these leadership skills? So it's developed by the time they're at those older ages. Any core values that you specify when you're having these conversations and building these relationships that you guys are looking for?
I'm going to piggyback on this question just real quickly because I think this speaks to a specific example I want to ask. I have a player on my team who is becoming very vocal on the field. She's becoming very vocal off the field. But sometimes those, sometimes she comes across as mean or yelling. And I, as a coach, as the adult, I know she's not meaning to be that way. I know she's just trying to lead and encourage. But it's not coming across that way to some of her teammates. And many of her teammates have come to me privately and said, hey, she won't stop yelling at me or she won't stop screaming on the field. And so what are some of those values, some of those things that we can do to help taking a kid who clearly has some leadership ability, clearly wants to lead, and to swing that to a more positive-based leadership?
Nate, we'll start with you, man.
Let me tackle your second question first, and maybe backdoor into the first one here. So one of the analogies that I've used with leadership classes that I've taught in the past, and I've used with teammates or players that have kind of a harsher tone of voice, which a lot of times is just motivated by the urgency of the moment, right? Like, you think about we're getting back on defense and we got to match up.
Yes.
I can't stand there and say, JP, if it's all right with you, it's not too much trouble. Could you take 42 in the corner over there? He's got to go and guard somebody and I got to guard somebody, right? Like we don't have time for courtesy sometimes when we're trying to solve a problem in the immediate. But what we try to encourage our players is to understand that communication is like a game of catch. So in my classroom, what I would do is I would bring two players up or two students up to the front of the room with a dodgeball. And I would say, okay, JP is going to throw to Charlie here. JP, I want you to throw this ball so that it can be caught, right? And so he throws it and Charlie catches it and they go back and forth. And then I say, all right, JP, I want you to throw this ball as hard as you possibly can. I want the ball to get to Charlie as soon as possible, no matter what, right? And so he rears back and he throws it super hard. And then I yell at Charlie because he didn't catch it. And the analogy here is that a lot of times when we aren't throwing a pass that can be caught, we blame the receiver. As a communicator, we just come out and start throwing these darts as hard as we possibly can with no awareness of, can the person that I'm passing this message to actually receive it, or am I throwing it too hot? And even Brett Favre and, NFL quarterbacks, they have to find some touch with certain situations and certain players or certain routes on the field. And it's no different in the art of communication. And so just challenging a player like that, first of all, I appreciate their ambition and their initiative to try to share information and reminders. I think that's important. But it's all for naught if your teammates cannot catch it, right? That's all for naught if they can't receive it. And so part of that is training the sender, the person that's throwing the pass. And part of it is also conditioning the receiver to say, look, JP doesn't mean it's not personal. He's not being angry with you. Like, he's trying to solve a problem in the moment in the game. And so if you can get past the tone of voice, is there anything on the inside of that message that actually does help you when you're on the field, right? And sometimes having that conversation in the classroom, totally away from the field, is something that can help players to understand where both parties are coming from to be able to try to have a functional game of catch or back and forth in the middle of a game.
I love that. I've probably said 1,000 times, listen to what she's saying, not how she's saying it. Just trying to get that process in. And I've used your example. Hey, I don't have time to say, hey, coach, I need you to walk over there and guard that player, or hey, I need you to get back on defense. It's going to be more immediate, more toward the point. So I love that and I love that dodgeball analogy, something that I'm definitely going to steal.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said you had a answer to the first part of the question, like specific core values that we're developing into these players.
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to those core values, JP's got some great stuff in his book about just, I think that first starts with a little self-reflection as a coach, in terms of determining what's most important to me. What do I want the foundation of our program or our team to be built upon, and doing a little bit of that reflective work before you start unrolling or unveiling what that is for your players. I mean, for us, what we've landed on at Mount Vernon, where I'm at now, is it's gratitude, effort, and love, and that's on the back of every shirt from third grade all the way through high school. And it's what we try to encourage our coaches at all levels. We don't talk about it a lot. It's not like we're standing up there giving lectures or, sermons on gratitude, effort, and love, but we try to capture it when it happens. We try to encourage it when it doesn't. And we try to, again, mold our influencers into setting good examples of what those things look like. And we do practice gratitude and trying to thank, officials and thank parents for bringing snacks and get the players to experience that a little bit. But just because that's what works for Mount Vernon girls basketball doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to work for, for your academy or anybody else that might be listening here. I think some of that just goes back to the coach trying to identify for them and for the program itself, what are the core values here that we want to build around.
I think if I was to add to what Nate shared there, I think when it comes to the, how we impart our values within our program, once we know what's important to us, especially when it comes to leadership development, is to recognize, we might have this vision of a leader, and a lot of times that's built on how we see ourselves in an idealistic role as a leader and what's important to us as a leader. But that's not necessarily going to be what it is for every player. And so I think it's really trying to help players discover what's important to them, what they're strong at, what they're good at, and what leadership looks like for them. And so, if you were coaching our team and Nate and I played for you and we were both your captains, to expect us to look a lot like, first off, to look like you as a leader would be ridiculous. And secondly, for us to be identical would be absolutely ridiculous, right? Because we are we're like chalk and cheese over here sometimes, right? So it is very, this is where leadership development is so experiential. It's not in a classroom as much as it's through the experience of being within a team. And it's also, you as a leader, you are not guiding them. You're trying to serve more as a Sherpa. As I remember hearing this, analogy in a Harvard Business Review article once. And I love this because a guide says, here's where we're going to go. And they got all the directions. And they're like, well, we take a right turn here. We take a left turn there, right? Like they know the path. And the reality is when you come in there with athletes and you ask them what's important to you, how do you want to impact the team? And you're a Sherpa, they're saying where they want to go. And you're just kind of here helping them along the path, making sure they don't fall down here or there. And you're just providing that support. And so you as the guide are asking lots of questions and they're doing most of the talking in that relationship. So I think that's trying to just give you a little bit more of the practical, what it might look like. It's definitely not heavy classroom sessions like let's talk for an hour about leadership. It's really, hey, let's sit back and let's see, tell me what you're thinking here, and those types of conversations.
My final question here, and JP, you kind of just answered it, but as coaches, what are some things that we can do, regardless of sport, but what are some things that we can do to help start developing that intrinsic motivation in our players? Maybe not those players that are going to be a captain one day or a leader of a company one day, but just that overall helping to build that intrinsic motivation of working hard or, whatever our values are on the field. How can we help that process?
Yeah, I'm sure Nate's going to have something brilliant here, so I'll keep mine short. Intrinsic motivation comes from autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think, we've talked a lot about ways to give them decision-making process, the ability to make decisions with our program, giving them responsibilities, right? Allowing them to have control over their experience. The more that they can be in the driver's seat, and we're in the passenger seat, the better. I think the mastery piece, they obviously want to see themselves improving. So much of that is being a good technical coach and being good. I think Nate is exceptional within his team of even in the tough moments of the season when you lose a few games, Nate always is able to use film to reinforce the mastery and the development. Hey, I know it doesn't look like on the scoreboard, but this is where we've made improvements. So, us being able to provide evidence for our players in the mastery is really key. I think when it comes to purpose, I've struggled with this, like trying to always come up with that shared purpose within the team. Like, this is our goal. We're going for this, or this is what we're all about. And I think that the challenge is two things. One is like, there's such a high focus on the self today. It's like all about like your reasons to play and what your goals are. And we do want to work with those things. But I think we also have to work with individuals to honestly help them discover their meaning about being a part, like helping them find meaning and being a part of the team. And I think what everyone wants to be a part of a team for somewhat similar reasons. But, if I looked at, say the two of you are teachers, you both find, probably some similar meaning having that job. But there's also something that's unique in your own story. So I think the more that we can work with athletes, to find their own meaning and purpose in their sport and being a part of that team and really craft that into something that connects to the whole team, the better. So that's kind of my thing. I'm sure Nate's got some good stuff too.
Yeah, I think the only two things I would add to that is that I don't care whether you're talking about the classroom or a team setting or I'm working with my own kids at anything. The number one motivator I think is the relationship where the person is seen and they feel that they're known, and that ties into all those things that JP talked about of understanding their own motivations and their, what do they enjoy about the game, but also understanding what they struggle with, and what they hope to get out of the experience and just listening and understanding each player individually. The more that we're known and it's safe to be known, the more likely we are to give of ourselves to whatever that endeavor is. I think secondly, when it comes to the specific values, so I'll use effort as an example, we could get into practice design and that's probably a whole nother hour conversation here, but I think there are ways for players to discover the benefits of effort, right? So we do a shooting ladder in our high school practices and keep track of about 10 different things, scoring things that we do, whatever. And so when our younger kids come up and they work with an older player, oftentimes there'll be a real discrepancy in their early scores, right? So maybe, Sally and Susie are working together. Sally's the senior. We're doing this 4-minute shooting drill. She scores 100. And then Susie goes and she scores like 65. Okay. And so we'll ask them, well, what did you notice that she did differently? Or what was the biggest difference besides the fact that she made more shots? And inevitably, either they'll figure out or we'll figure out from watching that the upperclassmen got more shots off in 4 minutes. Well, how did they do that? Well, they moved to the ball. They're ready to catch and shoot. Their effort level, their attention to detail, whatever those things are, is better. And that results in more opportunities to score, which results in a higher score, right? So we'll do that in, a 3-on-2 game where the offense will go 3 against 2. They win 5-1. Then we flip it. The defense goes to the offense. They lose, let's say 4-3, whatever it is. And we'll ask them, what was the difference? What did they do that worked that you didn't do? So creating opportunities to discover. Effort means we got more loose balls, which means we got more possessions, which means we got more shots, which means we scored more points, which means we won the game. And they can figure those things out, especially when they're on the losing end of something or even on the victorious end. And they can say, well, I noticed this, coach, we moved the ball a little bit more. It seemed like we passed it quicker. Well, that's selflessness, right? Instead of catching it and thinking about my own self-satisfaction here, JP, I'm catching it and I'm looking to move it right away. That's a manifestation of the value of selflessness, right? And so ways to tie that into the game, into your drills, into your practices. Will Ray, who we've had on our podcast a couple of times, is just phenomenal at being able to identify, here are the behaviors that reflect our values. And when we do more of them, we're more successful together. And I think the more that you can help players make those links, the more motivated they are to try to practice those values when they're playing the game.
Sorry, I'm taking notes on the good stuff you all are saying. Yeah, that's awesome. The kind of the theme, I just wrote this down, kind of the theme that I've heard in a lot of our questions today before we wrap up is, as a team, to kind of identify and find those values, find those goals that we want to accomplish, and then look at, okay, how are we going to get there? And that's going to allow players to take ownership in what they're doing. And then that's when you get things like hard work and good communication and, good attitude and being and wanting to come to practice so they get there on time, is just by finding that commonality within your team. That is that kind of a good summary of where we're going with leadership here? Awesome. Dunham, any final questions before I let these gentlemen wrap it up?
No, I think we've had a great conversation here. Definitely some insights that we can look at as coaches to approach our players differently, especially at the younger ages. And a lot of it has to do with some patience and moving on from there. So I appreciate the conversations here, guys. Any last thoughts from anybody else?
I just appreciate you guys bringing us on here. We're always excited to share and have conversations around culture and leadership.
Yeah, gentlemen, real quick before we sign off, anything that you all want to mention about, we'll put like your Twitter handles and your Thrive On Challenge links into this episode details, but anything you want to mention about either of those things. JP, you got a new book out. The podcast is awesome. We've mentioned that a few times. You all do the coaching and mentoring. So anything you all want to add to have a chance to sell yourselves a little bit?
I think you hit it all there. I don't know if we're missing anything, Nate, but that sounds great. So, just you can check us out at tocculture.com and get the book. There's online courses there and plenty of resources for coaches if they want to go deeper.
Awesome. Well, I definitely appreciate it, guys. Again, this has been a really special podcast for me because, as I mentioned, I look at both of you as role models, and I really appreciate you coming on. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Let us know when it drops, and we'll be happy to support you.
I appreciate that very much. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
I thank you for our conversation here. Again, that was JP, Nerbun, Nate Sanderson, and their Thrive On Challenge, the coaching mentorship. A lot of stuff, information there. Again, appreciate your time. This has been the A.C.E Football Academy. Catch you again next time.